Barbara.
And I'm Tracy Bradford. I'm the curator here at the Army Women's Museum. It's such a treat to meet you. And I have my colleague, Sydney Gentry, with me, and she's the president of the foundation that supports the museum.
Sure.
Alrighty, so Ms. Fallon, would you tell us a little bit about your service? I read a description, a biography that your daughter sent, and I know that you joined the WAAC, so you were one of the very first ones in. Can you tell us about joining the Women's Army Corps and what that was like for you?
Well, it was a very, very interesting because I learned early on that you hurry up to wait, which is quite a happening in the Army. And we all rode a train that took us to Fort Des Moines, Iowa. That first night was a revelation of women who had left their homes for the first time and were already getting pretty lonesome. I came from a very patriotic family, and that had something to do with my joining. In War One, there was an uncle of mine who they were picked up and just sent over to France without much training. And he was this, and they were also very adept with guns, rifles, and so forth. Because back then we didn't have the great services we now have with our grocery shops and so forth. But he was discharged, came back to the States, and was, no, he was still in France, excuse me. And anyway, he was killed by a German sharpshooter at that time. And they have since, in a small hometown from where he came, they have named the American Legion the Frank H. Hancock Post.
Did that impact your decision to join the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps?
I think that gave me incentive because my family was so patriotic and always wanted to help out. What did I think about what?
Fort Des Moines.
Well, I didn't have time to think. They hustled us around and gave us the uniforms that we would be wearing. And it was such a different climate. Humidity was something we didn't have from the West Coast, where I came from. And Fort Des Moines itself was large, well organized. But they put us into a large room, and I think we were on army cots, and you'd hear from all corners, you'd hear a little sob coming, because many of us are first times away from home, so far away from our original homes. We learned close order drill, much as the men had. You know, you'd first squad to the rear arch, second squad to the rear arch, to the rear arch. You know, you didn't say march, you said arch.
Did you like the uniform? Did you like how it felt to be a soldier and to wear the uniform?
Did I like wearing the uniform? Took a while. They were not great to begin with.
We would love to see a picture of you in your uniform if you have any.
I'll get one.
We had shoes that were, they had a very slight heel on them, and they were not very beautiful. They were not attractive at all.
Were those the little brown little Abner shoes you wore? Were they brown?
Yes, they were. Yes. They were.
Mhm. That's wonderful. So then you were sent overseas, right? So you went on a ship over to England and then into France?
Yes, we went to Fort Dix in New Jersey, and from there they took us on a train to where we loaded on the ship that was going to take us over to France.
The Queen Elizabeth?
I believe it was the Queen Elizabeth, and all the troops were being loaded, and the band was playing. It was a really, really exciting night. And then when there were two, I met the other girl who was a physical therapist. We were the last two to load, and the band stopped playing. I've never forgotten that.
So do you remember sailing across the Atlantic? Was it a long trip? Was it pleasant or unpleasant on the ship?
It was, I don't recall too much about that. There were so many aboard, and you had to stay within your own ranks. And I did talk, there was a GI standing as we left the New York harbor, and he said, I lived right up there. That's where I lived. And I talked with him. And then I was reprimanded by a senior officer from someplace for talking with GIs. After all, I was an officer.
Did you do any physical therapy while you were on the ship? Were you doing any work, or was it simply just a transport mission to get
It
you?
was a transport mission.
And where were you assigned when you got to France?
We landed in Marseille, and we had to walk in formation off the ship, and there to the side was a large group of soldiers who had been there for some time. And one of the soldiers started whistling. And among our group, we had a girl from the South, and this soldier was Black, and she would not accept that.
And the Women's Army Corps was segregated. And I know that there were African-American WACs that trained with you at Fort Des Moines. And then actually in Rouen, France is the location, the only African-American women who went overseas with the Women's Army Corps were actually stationed there in Rouen, France as well. So yeah, it was a segregated army, and it would be 1948 when the order would come to desegregate, in large part due to the service of African-American men and women during World War II. So it's a really rich history there.
We were on the trip, we had landed, we were in France by then, and we were on the troop train. It was a beautiful, beautiful, cold, full moon night. And it was so cold, and we were just stuffed in the train. There were many of us. And as the train would go forward, and then it would go back, and then it would go forward. And finally, we thought we could hear the battle shooting going on. And then we realized later it was in the other car. The guys were stamping their feet, trying to keep warm. And it was cold, very cold.
So had you been to Europe before, or was this your first time overseas?
This was my first time.
So everything was new to you, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, it was.
So I have a question. When you were in France and you were working as a physical therapist, where did you live? Where did you stay, and where did you work?
Well, Montmorency is where we set up our place. And I do want to tell you, part of our work, they were shipping back for a while taking care of the amputees who had been wounded. And then while we were working one day, there was this horrific noise outside our door. I opened the door, and there were some of the amputees. The guys with the legs on still had their legs. On their shoulders rode fellows who didn't have their legs, and they two teams, and they were having a race. And it's pointed out to me the spirit of our young men then. They had a lot of courage and spirit. And I don't know who won the race. Well, we tried to toughen up the stump, and we just really worked hard on it. I mean, hit them with our hands, so they'd be able to have their prosthesis, be able to handle that better. The prosthesis was where they put on a little more, where they had lost their arm, leg, whatever. And we learned to toughen up their stumps.
So you were trained as a physical therapist. Is that something that you were interested in doing before you joined the Army? Is that a field?
Well, yes, in a way it was. I was trained at the University of Wisconsin because in my dormitory in college was a girl who was already thinking about becoming a physical therapist, and that's where I learned. I found my interest came so suddenly too, because you want to help. I remember my family had lost their brother in War One, and now in War Two, I tried to do my part.
So did you continue on as a physical therapist after the war? Did you continue in that career field?
Oh, yes, I certainly did.
So, okay, I have a question then for you. So I know that your future husband was also a soldier. So had you started dating before the war? Can you tell me about your husband and his service too?
He was in the Pacific with the 41st Division, which was only the complete division that was shipped over to the war. And while he was sloughing around in the jungles in New Guinea, I was having a good time in France. There was a difference, and we corresponded back then using V mails. V as in Victor. They were just little onion skin or small things in which we wrote a few notes. And to show you what his kind of man he was, I was in college in the dormitory. He had called me and he said they were shipping out. And I said, well, good luck. And he said, you carry on, you keep a stiff upper lip. He's the one who needed the stiff upper lip, not me, because he went 3 years in the jungles and it wasn't fun. They had 3 different landings. And when they did come back to the States, ahead of them, a group of nuns that had been held prisoners came aboard, and they were celebrating them. And the boys who did all of that fighting so long, they finally got off the ship.
So do you remember being reunited with him? Do you remember the first time you saw each other after your service and your deployments overseas?
No, I do not. Oh, I'll have to tell you a little sideline. One of my patients had been the head chaplain for the 3rd Division. He was loved by everybody. He was such a jolly, likable fellow. And when they bombed Hitler's residence, he got a little close. and was injured and had a neurological injury. And that's how I became to know him. And I knew another fellow who also was from England or would go to England. He was a troop carrier pilot. And he picked up some bicycles for the two of us and brought them back. And we just could go all over France. He counseled me and he said, you go home and you marry that guy and you'll have a pack of kids. And we had 6 children, 3 girls, 3 boys. And they were, as my husband used to say, they are all educated. Oh, and here's a picture.
She's in her uniform. It's the only one I can.
Can
find.
you see that?
Can you hold it up just a little bit?
Oh,
Oh, look
wow.
at that. Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
That is fantastic. So
Been a long.
when you got out of the service, then I heard that you went back to Europe at the 50th anniversary. Is that correct? You went back for
That's
a
correct,
reunion?
VE Day. And it was a disappointment because it was conducted by a Frenchman, Vive la Compagnie, and we couldn't understand the French too well, but it was still a happy, joyful time. Fallon and her husband was an ROTC, and they had gone in on D-Day and landing at Omaha Beach. And he led his troops up it was a steep hill, but he got to the top and there was a German and he was taken POW for about 4 days until he was liberated. A fellow who took him prisoner had spent his honeymoon in Oregon, and he thought, beautiful country. He was going to go back there. They were going back just to see the country again.
Well, it is such an honor to meet you. And do you have a birthday in March? When is your birthday, Ms. Fallon?
My birthday is 3/11/22.
Okay.
I'm getting on.
Well,
Okay,
happy,
yeah, well,
happy birthday.
99. That's a wonderful life I had.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. And we thank you so much for your service.
Well, I enjoyed it.
At the museum, we have an entire gallery dedicated to World War II. So we have Colonel Obeda Bobbie's uniform. I don't know if you remember her as the director.
What was the name?
Colonel Obeda Bobbie. Was she
Oh,
the
yeah.
director? Yep, we have her uniform on display. And we have a WASP jacket. So one of the women Air Force service pilots. They weren't in the WACs, but those are the women who flew the airplanes back and forth from the factories to the installations where they were going to be used. We actually have a WAC bicycle. So you said you had ridden a bicycle in Europe, but the Army actually made a woman's bicycle specially for WACs. And so we have one of the few remaining WAC bicycles in the world. So we've got some amazing things here, and it is an absolute honor to be able to teach your history every day to both the Army and to the public. And that's what we do at our museum. So one last question for you. I read that you have a very interesting home. Can you tell us about your home?
It was, my husband designed it. It is partially earth sheltered and full of lots of light. We took it to an architect who put it together before it was built. It is built entirely of cement and steel. The only wood in it are the doors and around the windows. So it's a little different, but we have such a wonderful view.
Oh, but it has been such a treat to visit with you. And I just want to thank you again for your service and for your willingness to share your story.
Well, thank you. I love my service, and I'm certainly happy to serve you. And where in the world are you located?
So Virginia, right south of Richmond, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And I just wanted to let you know, so since I'm on an Army installation, I do work with soldiers. And yesterday we did an oral history with a female lieutenant colonel who has been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 6 times in the last 12 years.
Oh my.
So I just want you to know, though, the work that you did back in World War II laid the foundation for these Army women today to do the amazing things that they are doing. And, you know, I just wanted you to know that you were a trailblazer and your service has made a difference in the lives of women today who are doing absolutely amazing things with the United States Army. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you for interviewing me. I get a little stumbly, don't I?
No, you're fantastic.
Absolutely wonderful.
Hanging on.